Welcome back to episode 3 of the LS motor build. Thank you guys for all your suggestions and help with these cam bearings. I ended up purchasing the tool, buying the bearing set, so that is the goal today, is to get these cam bearings replaced and then continue on this build and hopefully get this motor completely assembled today. So the first thing I have to do is make a motor mount lift for the top on this intake valley. I don't have one. I got a couple scrap metal parts sitting over there, so I'm just gonna weld something up so I can get this thing lifted up and have access to the cam bearings. And then the first task is getting these cam bearings put in. All right, I got my helper today. You ready?
Yes.
Let's do it. All right, so we are gonna MIG weld this thing up pretty quickly. This is the MIG welder, right?
Yeah.
That's the TIG welder. Got me? That's done. Not my best work, guys, but I was just wanting to slap something together to lift this thing. And I know these plates are only like 50 bucks, but I'll already have to buy a block off plate for this as well because I'm not running the knock sensors. So I didn't want to have to buy the knockoff plate or the block off plate and then a lift plate, both of those. So I just whipped this up. I figured this will probably last a lifetime.
Looks pretty good.
Not bad for an old man, huh?
You're past an old man, Dad. You're a great old man.
Wow. You guys are cold. Woo! Lower down. Well, remember, I've taught you many times. You gotta lower it. How are you gonna lower it?
Oh.
Slow. Righty tighty, lefty loosey. Nice. Almost about to engage. Engage. Lift. We got the engine off the engine stand finally. So this is the cam bearing specialty tool. I've never used one of these before. This thing was like $90 on Amazon, I believe. Here's one of the old cam bearings that I've already knocked out. This sits right over the little bearing cup, and then you have your cone, which is your guide that sits in the first bearing race on the front of the motor, and then you pretty much just knock these out one at a time going backwards. They fall out, you grab them from the bottom, then pull your tool back out, and reinstall is pretty much the same way. Felt like it went somewhere. Here, you hold your hand right here.
Felt like it almost.
Hold this cone on so it doesn't bounce out.
All right.
You got it? Woo! All right, that's one. And we should be able to pull this. Maybe it'll come, well, I don't think it'll come out in this tool. Yeah, so it dropped in there. Yep. 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 Couple more. Yep. There it is. Last one's out. The tool worked great, cam bearings are out. Now we're gonna clean the journals as best we can with rag and brake clean, and then we're gonna get the new cam bearings, get those organized because they do go in a certain way. So we have to keep that in mind, then also keep our oiling holes lined up. So there's two obstacles we gotta overcome. So that was a couple hours that have passed because I realized I ran into a huge cam bearing hurdle. So apparently on the 2003 LS model motors, there was two different size, actually 4 different size cam bearings they used. The ODs were different sizes, and then also the width of the cam bearings were different as well. I thought I had an early 03. Come to find out, I have a later 03 model, and then they increased the size of the OD of the cam bearing, and then they also increased the width. And depending on what month, I guess the year, or what month the motor was made in that year, they used the different cam bearings. So I just Googled the crap out of this thing and asked a bunch of forums. Finally figured out what the issue was, because my cam bearings I ordered originally did not fit. And I was like, holy crap. I was almost thinking that the motor was rebuilt at some point and they used oversized bearings. No, that wasn't the case. In 03 and 04, like I said, there was a multiple different size bearings. So you almost have to take your engine apart and measure your bearings to know what size to order. Luckily, the O'Reillys down the street had these in stock. So now we double check to make sure the orientation is correct, because this is how they come in the box, and they actually have this part numbers right here for the position. So these bearings actually go in the front and back, and this is the middle, and then these are the 2 ends, and they have to be in the correct spots because they're different sizes. Not only you have to make sure they're in the correct spots, but you have to make sure the oil holes are lined up correctly. So here's the new cam bearings. This is the bearing installer tool. All right, we got the tool in and all the way through pretty easily. Now we're gonna make sure our oil holes in the bearing are lined up perfect. And then we're gonna hammer this thing in. As you can see on the back, this is kind of how the tool works. Slides all the way through, and then you have this centering cone to help hold the long bore directly center. And they say they want you to use this or install the bearing from the furthest position away possible. That way it's more straight. And that is it right there. So we are going to hammer this in all the way to this outer edge. All right, can't ask for better than that. Looks nice and shiny in there. It's squared up. The oil hole is lined up perfectly. A much longer process than I thought. Luckily I had my son here to help me, because he was able to reach up from the bottom and actually place a lot of the cam bearings while I slid the tool through and they made contact. It is definitely a 2-person job to do that, especially when the crank is still in the motor. But I think I'm going to take this motor and set it on the table. I was going to put the engine stand back on, but I really want to be able to use an extension and, like, you know, guide the cam through from the front and back, and then put the engine stand back on. So I think I'm gonna set it up here just a little bit on this plastic table. That way I can still have access to the front and back, and it'll hold it steady while I put the cam in. So it sits on those 2x4s pretty nicely. Maybe this is what the real engine builders do. We are not gonna be shy with this. Ooh, that is smooth, fellas. Oh my gosh. And you want to spin the cam when it hits each bearing. Woo, that's smooth. All right, so now we got half of it in. I'm gonna lube the other half while it's hanging here, supported. Makes it a little bit easier. And then I'll go in for my backside with my extension, a 3/8 extension. And there's a hole in the back of the cam. I can put the 3/8 extension all the way through and catch that back hole, and then I can use like both hands to take it all the way through, and she turns it nice and free. I mean, that turns really smooth. Yeah, it feels nice. I like it. I like it. All right, moving forward. All right, now we got our lifter trays. So we're gonna load the lifters into the tray. Apparently the oiling holes on the lifter Doesn't matter what direction you put it, but I'm gonna put them all one direction. I'm gonna put a little bit of assembly lube in each bore, and then we'll drop the trays in, and I will, again, assembly lube on the lifters. I feel like you can't have enough, right? So, and these drop in one way. Just like that. At this point, we're about to pretty much tie our two rotating assemblies together. We have our cam right here, which is free spinning, and then we have the crank. I got the crank bolt in the crank, and I'm just gonna do a couple rotations on it, make sure we're free and clear. And then there is a little dot machine into the gear that goes straight up at 12 o'clock, like that. And then the camshaft is the same way. I'm gonna pop on the camshaft sprocket, and then I'm just going to rotate it a few times and make sure it's still free and clear, good to go. And then I will stop when the indicator dot on the sprocket is at 6 o'clock. And those two are lined up. This motor is timed together. Now we just have to keep this in the same position and put our new chain on. Ooh, right there, perfect. All right, we have our new chain on. Ooh, that's nice and tight. It is on, it's lined up dot to dot. Cam sprocket bolts in with some blue Loctite. And those will go down to 22 foot-pounds. And our new cam is installed with the chain. That's nice, not a lot of play at all. Now we're going to rotate it a couple times, make sure we're free and clear and everything is turning together. We're about to slap the heads on. Before I do that, I'm just going to rotate this motor over so I can wipe out all the cylinder walls and get them good and wiped out. I know the top of the pistons aren't very clean, but that was just probably from a rich condition and some valve seal leaks, which will all be replaced or remedied, so that'll probably burn off. My cylinder walls are super clean, so I'm going to rotate the engine and put some assembly lube on the cylinder walls before I put the heads on and seal it up. Now it's head time, boys. So I got my surface Scotch-Brite down pretty good and cleaned up. I got my dowels in, and these are the head gaskets I'm using. It's like a triple layer metal, and right here it says front, so I'll put that on the front of the motor. And then we're just going to check a couple things to make sure that's in. There we go. It drops down over the dowels. It's for 4853 motors. The holes in the head gaskets are the same as the cylinders. Looks like we hold down our tappet blocks. Everything looks good. And I'll set the head on. Most definitely. You will get one bolt in there so it doesn't fall off. I got some new OEM torque to yield bolts, so before I drop them in, I will oil the underside of the bolt flange so it will have no friction or a lot less friction when we go to do the torque sequence. Now we're torquing the head bolts, and I just Googled this and looked in the manual, so we're gonna hit the head bolts in sequence. First, it's gonna be to 22 foot-pounds in sequence. And once that sequence is done to 22, we're gonna go 90 degrees. And I don't have an indicator, so I'm just gonna do it by eye. So 90 degrees would be, you know, starting right here, and then I'm gonna end the torque wrench right here. 90. 10. And the final pass, same sequence, 70 degrees. Big bolts are done, then we just go back on the smaller bolts on the intake side. Torque these to 22. Driver's side is done. Now we're just going to repeat everything for the passenger side. All right, heads are on. The last thing we have on the front is our oil pump. And of course, I got a new one. That was a no-brainer, I was thinking. So I got the Melling stock pressure, stock volume. The one thing I want to do after doing a little bit of reading, I'm going to pull this spring out and I'm going to give this a shim. Maybe 20 or 30 thousandths if it's something I can find. Because what I've read is it'll increase your oil pressure about 5 to 10 psi at idle. And knowing how I am, I always watch my oil pressure gauge, and when it gets low, especially when the LSs get hot, it's just so annoying to me. I'd much rather for it to be above, you know, 10 or 20 at idle. So we're gonna shim this thing out. Let's head to the hardware junk drawer. I think everybody has one of these. I just got my feeler gauges, which we will need to install the oil pump. I'm just gonna find my 30 thousandths. And we will try and find something close to that. It's not too big. All right, this one's so close. It's gotta work after just a little bit of filing. All right, here's the little washer that we made, and I actually just filed it down, and it fits perfectly in the cap for the spring, and the spring will sit right on that. And it'll give it about 30 thousandths. Now the oil pump will slide on pretty easy. You just gotta line up the crank and the grooves on your gears in the pump. We'll get these guys finger tight and get it snug. And then we're gonna use a different method to align it. I got this from That Engine Guy on YouTube. That's all he does is build motors, like a lot of them. So I definitely trust his opinion. So we're gonna get this thing snugged up, pull the cover off, and then we're gonna line it with some feeler gauges before we torque it. Now that our gears are exposed, what we wanna do is we're gonna take a 2,000 shim, and we are gonna make sure that in between this circle gear and the aluminum housing is about 2 thousandths all the way around. When we feel that it is, then we will torque these bolts right here. And what that does is just let this steel gear get perfectly centered in this aluminum housing so it's not rubbing on one side or the other. Fortunately, I only have one 2000 feeler gauge, so it might be a little tricky, but we will try. Oh, there we go. Oil pump is shimmed and torqued down. It's good to go. We're gonna put this cam cover seal back in, and then we'll put this back on the motor. I'm gonna put a little bit of RTV on the outside of it. I will just tap it in. Got the gasket on. The front timing cover is pretty simple. It goes on. There is a torque spec and a torque sequence. The biggest thing about this cover is you want to make sure that you have a flat surface where the cover meets the oil pan. And a lot of times they say tighten your oil pan bolts first and then your cover, but the only reason that they really say to do that is just so you have this on a flat surface. So I'm just going to line it up by hand with a straight edge. If you do that, you're good, because it calls for RTV right here on the edges anyway. For the oil pan, we got a rear sump pan. This is kind of your common swap. And I have no doubt that we are probably gonna have to modify the tray in the bottom. So as you can see right here, the pan does not sit all the way down. No big deal, it's probably pretty common. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pull this pan back off and I'm going to make sure that we sit down flush without any gasket. So right now it looks like I have to cut maybe a couple inches of this front splash guard off so the actual oil pan will sit on here. So that's what we're gonna do. All right, round 3. We got that corner cut off. Nope. God, like we're hitting even more now. I wonder if that's just, see if we can, I'm just gonna move it back and forth, wiggle it around a little bit and see if I can make some scratches on the surfaces. That way I can know what's hitting. So right now I'm just measuring in my pan the depth to the mounting surface, and it's 5.5 inches. So if I take this, I mean, we're right at 5.5 inches. So it feels like the pan is going down and hitting right here on the bottom, which is what we do not want, because even if it's close to it, you're still really limiting your oil intake. I think we got it figured out, guys. It was still hitting a little bit. What I did, I actually got two 2x4s and set them up right here. And I used a rubber mallet and I hit this bend on this back side right here. Actually, I had it upside down. So 2x4s like this. I hit this bend a little bit, and what it did, it actually helped lay this back angle down just enough to clear. So I think this bend was just not drastic enough. So I put, maybe a couple extra degrees in it, tweaked it out just a little bit, and it works perfectly. Now we're going to install our O-ring. Now with Melling oil pumps, if you're using your stock pickup tube or it's tapered or it has a groove, you want to use your green one. We don't have that. Ours is an aftermarket. It is just a straight pipe. So they say to use the black O-ring for that. So we're going to put this green one aside and we're going to use the black O-ring. I put it on here first just so when I install the pipe, it'll be easier and I can actually see it go down into the hole. So there we go, right there. It is just about in. It's sitting down in there good. So now we're just going to slowly tighten it up evenly down to, I think, like 120 inch-pounds. Now we'll get all our windage tray bolts back on. All right, I think we're finally good to go after those adjustments. This is the part where I'm going to use a little RTV in the corners of where the block oil pan meet. I'm going to use a whole lot, just a little bit. She is complete. It is ready to go in the car and get mocked up. I put the valve cover on just temporarily because I will put a trunnion bearing upgrade in the rocker arms before I bolt those on. And thanks to you guys have convinced me we are putting a turbo on this motor. That is 100% guaranteed. We will be adding a turbo, so that's why it's also missing the front accessories, because I'm gonna wait till I get all that mocked up in the engine bay and kind of get a feel for the size and the spacing and the gaps and everything else before I purchase any front accessories. So that being said, make sure you guys subscribe, hit that notification bell to this channel, because now we get to have some fun with the Trans Am. We don't need that motor in that Trans Am anymore. So I'm gonna drain the engine oil, replace it with WD-40, and see how long that motor runs, just burning donuts like crazy. So you guys stick around for that. Hopefully that'll be within 2 weeks. And then when it does blow up, I'll pull it out and we'll make a cool shop table for the shop. Thank you guys for watching. I know that was a long video, and for like the 1 or 2 people that are probably still sticking around watching this, thank you. Love you guys. God bless, and y'all have a great week.